Alright, hell yeah. Okay, so in this video, what we're going to talk about is R1 rafting dynamics. First up is I've been able to do more tricks on the wave, and so much so that I need to kind of organize them. And so each one of these sheets of paper is maybe a trick, maybe a combination of tricks, and it's going to highlight like where my boat placement is, and then what we can do. Okay, hell yeah. But this video is just going to be kind of one-page brainstorming of what I would like personally out of an R1 raft, especially for play, like a play raft. And right off the bat, I should be able to test this when the water gets warmer, or if I get my dry suit all dialed in. But I have two 8-foot, they're pretty much, let's say they're creek boats, you know what I mean? 8-foot kayak, full-on whitewater kayaks that I'm going to kind of put together. And I think that can give benefits just of having a planing surface that's going to be the industry standard for as fast as you can go, on that surface. The cool thing, though, is even in my 10-foot raft, I'm able to edge over onto one tube because my floor is pushed down. Now, there's some physics there. If you just have two tubes, and especially if you have a floor that's raised, or a floor that's not pushed down as much, or at all, then those two tubes are going to be railed. And if you lean to one side, sure, that tube is going to have less pressure on it. It's going to be less, but still, like the tackiness with the water is still there. And so I think what I'm going to test is the two kayaks, when you weld a frame together, make a V. So then when you're sitting on one, at least, the greater portion of that other kayak is out of the water. Now, there's going to be one of the modifications, that I would like to see is a very fast draining, round R1 boat. Paddle cats, because they don't have a front and a back end to catch water, they're very fast draining, and that's a huge benefit from my use of the RMR Paddle Cat in the surf waves, especially the bigger waves, but it is quite large of a boat. For a rounded boat, what I think you can do is take the inflated floor and remove up to 1 to 2 I-beams, and then make a mesh cover. And my idea is you would only need that for the center cockpit. I think that's the only place that should be draining. And so there's going to be two modifications from this. And this is actually kind of the last thoughts, is that would you take a whitewater kayak and then right down the center make a little dip like this and put a line of drain holes? I don't think so. You know what I mean? Not that the drain holes are, a huge amount of drag. I don't think they are. And in a whitewater kayak, that's another thing to explore, because it's so much surface tension that an I-beamed boat, potentially from a physics perspective, is allowing water to not get captured. It's like those aqua tires, you know what I mean, for Goodyear and stuff, whatever they're called. I'm not going to dive into that. But, I mean, just for, if you want your boat to be sleek and fast, where you're sitting and underneath might as well mimic a kayak. And I actually didn't write this on here. I don't want to get off script too much. But our R1 boats are so big anyway. Even a 9-foot to 10.5 to 11-foot boat is so much boat to work with. Like, if you took a 11-foot boat to a kayak, a downriver whitewater kayak race, that's a long boat. And so the fact that you can put an R1 boat onto edge, and you already have a 10-foot boat, you should have a fast boat. There's no reason an R1 boat shouldn't be fast. And again, not to get off script too much, but you get a heavy paddler in a slalom. And a slalom whitewater kayak isn't the fastest kayak. It's just the most maneuverable and can get up onto a plane and have a nice wide planing surface. Very rigid. The boat is light, but I mean, who cares? You throw a kayaker in there that weighs 250, they're still going to be zipping with that. And so I think that is almost a paramount statement, that it's not the weight of your boat itself, it's the shape. You know what I mean? Where we can have really good shapes, and that'll be kind of interesting to experiment with these two kayak designs, because I mean you're pushing 45 pounds per. You're already at, after a frame, you're already pushing over 100 pounds, and so it's not going to be. And so that will be kind of an interesting thing to test, the extra weight, but still see if you can get that performance. All right, so that is on the ticket, and that will be technically the shortest R1 boat, 8 foot. And that's the crazy thing. From an industry standard, like, give us whatever, man. Give us rigid pool toys. We'll R1 it. Okay, so let's dive into it. And I'm going to make sure I don't lose any footage. So that was a huge introduction, but I think this is a good place. Hell yeah. All right, so my thoughts, kind of from an overall perspective, is that the changes that I want for my R1 boat come from the fact that my R1 boat has always been high rockered. It's rockered this way, bow to stern. It's also rockered sideways. You know what I mean? Beam, like the beam. I don't know if it's called beam to beam, but whatever. I flipped a lot, especially in my early days. I couldn't figure out, like, the kind of the new breed of R1ers. Like, I don't know. If your boat is slightly more stable, hell yeah, your confidence level is killer. And so, and I'm just pointing out, like, the new generation of R1 boaters are wanting to do every river in America that kayakers are doing. You know, going down more technical and more dangerous environments, sieved out, high gradient places where one mistake, you're just in the water. And so from that perspective, you would want stability over rocker. And I can speak to this because, I mean, just a little bit, but this summer I was able to take the RMR Fat Cat and do a full, like, almost 2-week session in North Carolina at the Olympic Whitewater Center, or just the Whitewater Center. And, I mean, it's an unfair advantage for the RMR Paddle Cat. It's just like, oh, okay, like, this is, you know, you can just, you know, be in one position and crush. There's a chance that it might flip, but yeah, it's kind of fascinating. Yeah, but that said, yeah, so let's get into this, because it's kind of interesting. I would say R1 is like, or what we have R1 currently. Like, you know what I mean? Within the last 5 years, there's been, you know, more 9.5 foot boats. Okay? You know, a little bit of design towards, like, hey, what you want for an R1, but still keeping it R2. And so that's kind of interesting. But that's fine too, because an R2 boat might be more stable for an R1er. Okay, so my general philosophy is that R1 is like, it's like the first generation pack rafts. You know what I mean? Kind of just long, elongated, flat, kind of donut shaped, you know, pack rafts. Not a lot of tech going into them, but those revolutionized kayaking. A person could hop in and just do their thing. Some was easier. Hell yeah. But if that is all kayaking knew, was the first generation pack raft, currently you wouldn't have, you know what I mean? And I'm talking, That's it. I'm talking no whitewater kayaking and no Olympic sports, because kayaking is an Olympic sport, especially canoeing as a specialty. C1 and kayak slalom K1 have been around for generations. Um, but if you didn't have those and you just had this lumpy pack raft, there is no way that you would see all those other sports emerge. I mean, it would be a long journey. And so I feel like R1 in inflatable boats is like that. I think there's something about R1, just the seated position, that's different than C1 kayaking. You're not kneeling and strapping yourself in. You're in a loose boat, but still, like you can, like, and people are just like, well, wouldn't you just be like C1ing an inflatable kayak? Not really, because if you are sitting in the traditional R1 position, where you're like up on a side tube or even halfway centered, your feet out in front of you lower, with at least a little bit of elevation, that kind of defines what R1 is, and not locked in, so you can move around to different places in the boats. Even if you had that, well, I guess I don't know where I'm going, but just going back to that, that's where we are with R1. We have a position, the ability to move around, but we still have very first generation boats. The cool thing is that we have all the generations of whitewater kayaking, slalom kayaking, to show that this is where you put, from a fluid dynamics perspective, like this is where you put your edge. And already, within the last 5 years or more, the new generation of R1ers, like from a play perspective, have been, utilizing that back end stern. And so that's going to be one of the big elements that I would like to see. I think you want to be able to do these back end stern maneuvers from the center cockpit. And we can talk about that. You'll still have to like lean back to get there. But I think the boat overall is too long, especially if you can design an R1 playboat. Your cockpit can still be the same size, same comfort for your feet and stuff like that, but a small shift back should put you really close to the back of the boat to do those stern maneuvers. There's no reason why your feet would have to get beyond the thwart that you're sitting into a further back compartment. Alright, hell yeah. But that's huge, because that's kind of this philosophy that says, well, can we take these first generation, round rafts and do the things that a slalom kayakers can do? Can we do the things that whitewater kayakers are doing? And all the new R1ers currently are doing all the big rivers. But I would say minus the slalom skills. Because all the current kayakers that are like, I don't know, just kind of running like heavy class 5 is like, if you have these slaloms, and you don't have to, you could have just like, I don't know, just weird, like from a whitewater kayaking perspective, like you could just have, I don't know, like what's the minimum set of skills just to be like a hella charged up, class 5 kayaker? But it would be bizarre if you couldn't like edge hard. You know what I mean? Like it would be bizarre if you couldn't edge out of a hole or know a few ways to escape a hole. But current R1 is that, and me included, is just like, like I just feel like I'm on the cusp of being like, okay, we have a round boat. How do we exit a hole? And one is because, like, these holes, once we get in them, the objective is just hopefully it kicks us out. 2, the boats currently are very long and wide. They're just long, elongated donuts. And especially in holes, they will just surf sideways. The round boats will flip easy. The paddle cats can stay in easier. But I mean, one of the most basic tricks for a kayaker in a hole, especially a play kayaker, is to be able to be in a side surf and then turn down the wave. You know what I mean? Put your stern into that wave. And so that's because the stern is low volume. But do you need a play boat kayak to actually do that maneuver? No. Like literally whatever genre of kayaking you're doing, even a creek boat, on a decent sized wave, you should be able to put that thing, you know what I mean, and face whatever direction you want. You should be able to, do that. And so I think a lot. So let's kind of at least wrap this up and talk about the highlights. Even just sitting in my boat the other day, I need a pivot point right behind my seat or just even in front of my seat. Like if I want to actually, all right, let's slow down, because I just talked about how I want to get to the back and then get the boat vertical on the stern. It's great for surfing. The Colorado R1ers have shown that. Most of them only sit in the back when surfing, and I think that's I don't know if that's just like a cultural thing or it's just difficult to actually maneuver the boat. Like I don't mind being in the middle compartment and figuring out how to do that, because I just figure as this sport progresses, you'll have a middle compartment and you'll be able to do the things that you're doing in the back anyway. Like that's my idea, especially with an R1 playboat. Okay, so the first modification that I'm already working on my R1 raft is filling up the back compartment. And so for this next session, I've kind of got it figured out where I can kind of fill my back compartment, and so I can get back on there and then use that. So not only can I slide behind the thwart and I'm still on a surface, I can even slide all the way back as far as I need to. So then if my feet are, just kind of hooked into the thwart, then I can almost get to the very back of the boat. Okay, and so that brings in one of the other aspects. If you are actually going to aggressively move around the boat where your feet are no longer locked in underneath the front thwart, I think it is useful to develop ways to have your feet, under different set of wedges. And so the current front thwart is just wedged under something like wedged under a front thwart. I don't see any reason why you couldn't have even drop stitched panels that go across that are welded down like this and then welded down in a box, and even have just for your foot to get under a little well, all the way across. So then if you are in this position, you could actually put your feet, because for most wedging, all you need to do is just wedge your toes, and then hopefully it releases. You know what I mean? And so to have those long and maybe periodically on the floor might be useful. Okay, so hell yeah. So I think that's what I'm currently working on is hey, can I get to the back of the boat? If I'm already wanting the back of the boat to be a different shape, can I kind of just play around with, well, if I can get there from the middle compartment, maybe I can, hell yeah, kind of see what I want underneath that stern. I'm going to get some more time. Alright, hell yeah, I think I can slow down and we can actually get to these. I want the stern just like a half slice. So if you look at a half slice, it's hard to do that, but the back of the boat, so if here's the kayak and here's the front, the back of the kayak where you're sitting is like that. I mean, it's literally a hinge. Where the front of the kayak, sure, it's nice and rounded. So let's talk about the back of the kayak and the front. And where I want to be sitting, neutral sitting position in the thwart should just feel like, uh-oh, I'm going to tip that back. I think that's useful, because then where you're sitting is a I don't want to use too many cliches, so let's not. Where you're sitting is just a position where if I scoot back a little bit, hell yeah, now I'm tipped onto that surface. Enough said. Now I just release the entire front of my boat. But if I just go back to the neutral position, hey, now I'm kind of riding on this portion. And I think because, you know, the underneath the hull, and especially looking at, well, all kayaks, but even the slalom kayaks, this is where you're going to get your extra width. This is, I mean, you have slight rocker, but also you have kind of your width, because if you actually do get a little bit of speed, that's your planing surface. Hell yeah. And, you know what I mean? A planing surface when you are surfing. So there's two different things here. When you are surfing, hell yeah, that's a planing surface. Water is conveyor belting underneath your boat. If you're in flat water, not really. What actually happens with a fully rockered boat is it just kind of tips and then you kind of sink down and now you're just displacing that water. But it is more useful to still have a planing surface that you can maybe balance out, and then, you know, you're still displacing. Whatever the width and the depth, you're just pushing that water. But from my current R1 boat, if I'm in the very back, like, it can feel absolutely awful. And here's a test. If you have an R1 boat, put a rope on the front and pull it up, you know, some sort of flat water or just some sort of easy current. It's freaking awful. And I should do this test, because if I throw in like 20 pounds of water in the front of the boat and pull it, now I'm actually like lifting the bow. I'm still displacing water, but I'm not like trying to like lift it up over something. So there's a little bit of dynamics there that kind of helps and hinders at the same time. Say one more thing about that. When I'm exiting my serves, and this is kind of a new technique to actually drive that momentum into shore. A lot of the techniques that really work is like driving all the way to the bow and then like putting your weight on the bow. And then so all you and your weight is on the bow. The back is sticking up out of the water. You don't have any drag there. And you're just taking this point mass and then using its inertia. And mainly for those R1 moves is like you're also releasing all the other tacky points, you know what I mean, that aren't doing you any good. They're trying to send you downstream where you're trying to drive that. So that's really fascinating. Also, like, that's why you're already, when you're paddling, you're already at the back, like spinning out to get to shore and then heavily leaning off the back of the boat already puts you into that. Now the stern is really low. All the other boats out of the water maybe, and now you're driving that inertia. Okay, hell yeah. I do think it would be useful for the back end to have that half slice, pretty low volume, and then probably trapezoidal. You know what I mean? If you can't move back from the thwart very far, you know what I mean, it should be just long enough to mimic what the current R1 boaters are doing from the back. I mean, literally, the new generation of R1 boaters that are trying to do stern maneuvers, they're sitting in that back compartment, and then they're able to get the boat, you know, vertical, or able to do a lot of end tricks. And so I'm thinking you just reduce the end and then make it more pointy, make it more low volume. So you still have a surface there when it contacts the water, it's plenty wide. It's just low volume when you go vertical for that stabbing in. And we can combine some things. Let's say you make this stern that is, you know, kind of low volume, and it's actually kind of, you know, it's not too high off the water, but when you go to sit on there, you might want to be sitting up at this elevation. Well, let's say, you know, that's where I think you can even make the seated position and then have like a gap like this. So let's say this is your driving in nub, and then here's your seated position. You can continue this vacancy, and I think that's useful. One, for your stern to actually like get it to plunge, you know, and your stern can plunge hella because it's not the bow. The bow, you know, you're going to go over the handlebars, but to actually engage that stern into more vertical motions would help R1, especially treating your R1 boat like a slalom kayak. Like diving into an eddy, might as well go for a stern squirt, rotate your boat, and then orient yourself out. And just from the skill, what we need is an R1 boat that if you were in flat water, you could still do these tricks. And hell yeah. And there's only a few R1ers that post footage, but if you go across the country, I don't know, like I definitely saw quite a few R1ers on my journey, and R1ers that I've never seen, and kind of crushing it. One guide at the one R1er at the Whitewater Center in North Carolina, yeah, he was very well balanced on his back stern, and using all those fundamentals. Hell yeah. Okay, so with that said and what we just talked about, I think the one thing that I would like to eliminate is the rounded tube. I don't think the rounded tube is helpful. I think what a kayak looks like is helpful. Whatever edge a kayak has, that's all the edge that you want. And let's say it does kind of hard bite, but you want to be sitting up here, I think you work on having a vacancy. So the edge of your boat is a traditional kayak edge, you know what I mean, planed, and then you have, you know, a double railed, whatever you need, you know what I mean, to put that in. This is your secondary stability. That's plenty enough, and you actually get stability by like putting that end in as kind of like a knife. You build that stability. Sure, it can actually, especially sideways, can actually catch. But inside surfs, you kind of want to. You want to, on both sides, what I've been watching is a little bit of C1 kayaking. And you can just watch normal playboat kayaking. But you are, to actually on big waves to get your boat up, you are dropping an edge to catch. And currently in an R1 boat, man, like you either catch and then flip on these huge waves. There's no kind of intermediate. So I really do think if your profile is just like a kayak, you're going to get that secondary stability. You can lay it in and bite. And what I think, and I'll have to test this, I think my front round too, especially the bow, I'm always like striking the bow, and the water just fills in. And once it goes up and over, it just catches, you know, it just fills, and really detrimental. I think even my boat, if it had the rounded bow, if I actually put flanges, you know, up and curved the other way, even taller, that it would really reduce that bite. And so what I've been finding in my surfs is that bite is fine. You can use that to your benefit, and as it's pulling you out, it should release. And so that's what you want. You want a strong bite, and then be able to release it when you're able to. And so, hell yeah. And yeah, the RMR Fat Cat with the pontoons, that's what I noticed on surfs. Like even just that pontoon shape is way better than a rounded surface. You put in that pontoon point, it can suck down and you're not going to flip as long as it's not that type of wave where you're just totally going to, you know, excuse me. Oh, sorry about that. But yeah, do over the handlebars. But else, those pontoons are going to go in, suck, and then pop up. And so, so currently with the rounded bows, oh man, it drives me. So that's the two things that drive me nuts currently. Is the bow hits, water goes in over the bow, it just fills up and carries me out. One, I get kicked out of a surf. The other, I'm just taking in unnecessary water. And so that brings up that I want covered bow and stern. There's no reason the bow and stern should take in any water. But I've already talked about I want it different than a paddle cat. I think, like you could imagine a paddle cat, but instead of where the fabric is, you actually have like drop stitch material. So when you lean back on that, you're able to edge. And from your perspective, like what are we talking about? We're talking about modifying a round boat and modifying a paddle cat. And I think both get advantages by looking more like the other. And, yeah, kind of meeting in the middle. Okay, hell yeah. I think the the front of, well, let's go back to my experiment of putting two kayaks together. If I put two kayaks together, you know what I mean? And then from a visual perspective, that will have that perfect hole shape. Out of the water, it'll have two kayaks that are just doing their thing, picking up water, releasing it. And then you're going to have a third, elevated, like traditional height for an R1. But that can be an elevated platform that's connected at the cockpit. The cockpits on our boats aren't very big. And so if you eliminate this rounded tube shape, then you can just have your cockpit where it is, have your kayak underneath, and then you can have vacancies and voids around. That's what I want to experiment with. It could totally backfire, like all these knifey edges, but I don't think so. Because if a kayaker couldn't control their edge, they would have modified it long ago. They would have had to add an extra sponson. But here's the cool thing. In an R1 boat, we have too much boat to work with. It's like literally two kayaks and longer. And so you can have an extra sponson. So you can dig a traditional kayak edge in and then have something else gain a third point of stability. Okay, so hell yeah. So I think we've thoroughly talked about the stern and the bow. I'm just going to say that the bow, if you're using two kayaks, I mean, like the Narvana has a really good, I think that is where I really want to experiment and test with R1 design, is that bow shape. I think there's a real benefit to having two kayaks, or I mean two tubes, just like a paddle cat, compared to just having one tube. My raft in particular has a very long floor. Let's get some more juice. Alright, hell yeah. And we got to finish this up. So my raft has a really long inflated floor. It actually sticks out way too much. That's the one thing I can't modify in my raft. If I could, I would reduce that, and then I would have more rocker in the stern, more rocker in the bow. Nothing I can do. And because it sticks out so much, it almost sticks out like a point up front, and so it gives me a real point of instability up front. Now a lot of that is just going into waves and jumping to the wrong locations and not realizing like the wave dynamics for R1. But a pontoon, if you have two stable surfaces driving, and that's going to be superior. And so the two kayak underfoot with a V hull, and then with mesh, high draining, that's kind of, and an elevated platform, hell yeah. And because you're not using any tubes for your compartment and your thwarts to wedge your feet in, what this does is it gives you a little bit more room. Like our current compartments are, because we have 18-inch to 19-inch or 20-inch tubes, like moving in on our space. Sure, we actually sit out onto that 20-inch surface, but this gives us an opportunity to, I still like the same compartment dimensions. It's just it allows you to maybe have different foot placements. You can have foot placements like those beams or bars that I was talking about where you get your feet under, but if you wanted to move more towards the bow, I think moving more towards the bow would be very beneficial in R1 boating. The stern, we talked about how you just shift back and you're just right on that pivot. But the bow, it's very hard to get past your weight past the thwart. When you go put your shin up against the front thwart, it feels like that's as far up on the front thwart as you can be. So what I would like to see is that rounded shape way farther in front of the front thwart. So when you're just in your normal position, like the boat should feel nice and rockered. And I think this will occur if you're using 8-foot kayaks, because you've already reduced your boat by 2 feet. And the Narvana has a really good service. And I think the one benefit to this, especially going out to all the other, R1ers that are crushing the Class 5, I think what you want to do is what kayakers, and just like take Dane Jackson as like a role model. He's going on like the North Fork of the Payette at high flow and just launching every hole. And that's I think the bar that we should set for R1, you know what I mean, is just like, can you be in this Class 5 environment and go do that? Because that maneuver is not a Class 5 maneuver. the danger of the current and the situation you're in is class 5. The hole itself does not make it a class 5 move. And so what I've been looking at is like the lock saw, and looking at the holes that you could actually launch and boof. And I'm talking like difficult ones where you're just like, oh, no one wants to do that. Where you actually have to launch and then land in kind of a very precarious location. You know, it's just like even me, I didn't have, you know what I mean. I didn't want to like boof initiate. Alright, hell no. So we kind of lost a lot of footage, but might just chill it out. So yeah, on the Golly, I wasn't able to want a boof initiation. Kind of had high hopes, but there was a lot of little things that I wanted to do. I wanted to mimic one of Dane Jackson's line of dropping the left slot, catching the eddy, and then ferrying back, and then launching that the massive pour over. I mean, but from a technical perspective, that's not going to be the biggest pour over you run. It's not going to be the most dangerous. And the Golly actually has some of these that are fairly runnable. Now, I mean, I would, for whatever reason, I would rather do that one because it's sticky as hell if you F it up. But alright, so back from the R1 design is that, you know what I mean, the kayakers, especially Dane Jackson, you know, you do have like the Narvana, which actually can skip these holes. And so you're not just like plugging, you know, yeah, so I think there's a big benefit to modify, especially the front of an R1 boat, to really mimic, let's say, like the Narvana. And so hopefully my design of like 2 kayaks put together will be useful from 2 perspectives. One, you got 2 points like busting. And I think I mentioned this, you know, after the camera cut off. When I went to use the RMR Fat Cat, is just night and day stable. You know, and that's what in my R1 boat's always very highly unstable, but we're able to, you know, do things like a traditional kayaker probably would. Traditional kayaker would just tip over and roll up and then just build that skill. But yeah, that's where I think the 2 roads have, you know, I mean, if you are an R1er, like, I don't see why you want hella stability. You know what I mean? Especially because kind of the new R1ers, the new generation, trying to, like, you know, keep up with every major kayak run, you know, in the nation, let's say. And so, without a roll. And so, I mean, there's some heroism that goes along with that, no doubt. Hell yeah. All right. So, but yeah. So I think yeah. So this is where I went with it. Is just like running holes, like hell yeah. And then Dane Jackson has a great footage of like running the North Fork, just doing a lap on, you know, some middle North Fork. And just launching hole after hole. Like holes that are very, very steep, you know, and then have some sort of pillow that if you're not skipping, like, good night, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to get so disoriented running those. And so, but that's where in R1 boat, we have too much boat to work with, you know what I mean? It's the longest boat currently on the river. And so it should technically be the fastest. And so hell yeah. So that's where I'm hoping, you know, the 2 kayaks put together, especially with a V-hole, can actually edge one where the other one's totally out of the water. If you landed both, they would both skip. And so I think that could have a lot of benefit. Alright, hell yeah. And so, yeah, so we definitely talked about that. We kind of finished with... Oh, that's my ice water. We finished with talking about how the seated position in the top of the boat doesn't have to be anything related to the actual footprint of the boat. And so when I look at a whitewater kayak and just kind of looking at the design, It definitely has quadrants. That's other kayak instructors have used that term. I just kind of used it when I was doing my stuff, and it's just kind of fascinating that others have used that. I don't know if that's a proprietary term that people use, or it's just a colloquial term that people use. But whitewater kayak, for sure, like the back corner, you have the stern that maybe is kind of pointed like this, but if you if you work that back corner, now you're at, an angle. And an R1 boat is very diamond shaped. Mine is particularly, and most round R1 boats are. And so if you get to the back quadrant, on that diamond shaped boat, you can release 3/4 of your boat. And in the Fat Cat, I would still get to that same location. And technically, putting weight here is kind of reducing weight around 3/4 of the RMR Fat Cat, but because there's hardly any rocker, it's like, nothing's coming out of the water. It's just getting reduced in its weight distribution. But there's a lot to be said to actually physically removing that tackiness from the water, especially when I'm surfing waves. I'm trying to place my boat into very tighter locations, and that's where it's just like a lot of these harder, more technical or just bigger class 5 runs, sometimes the features get more narrow. Like you got to fit in different locales that, And so just being able to edge, get to a quadrant and release 3/4 of your boat, I think is a huge benefit. And that's where even like the Paddle Cat could look more like a round boat. And in the round boat, I'm talking about putting two, kayaks together and making it function more like a Paddle Cat. Hell yeah. All right, so we kind of lost kind of the end footage, but I think that is about where we'll end it. And so hell yeah. And maybe I'll try to, I don't know if I'm going to redo this video. Sometimes these just get long on me. But hell yeah. It's just kind of interesting. But I'm kind of alone on this journey just because the stuff that I'm trying to bring doesn't give you more stability. It actually gives you less stability. It gives you potentially more unique maneuvers that could be useful down the road, but I don't think like at face value. I think like turning the round boat into a kind of a Paddle Cat is a good idea, and I think this Paddle Cat that you can totally edge one tube, like that's something that would actually make your boat tip over more. But I still think that's a decent idea. Oh yeah, this is kind of where I ended it. R1 boat is a diamond shape. Where I'm missing stability is on the side tube. And so I want this side tube to be kind of a double diamond, where just the place where you sit actually juts out and you get a third stability point, maybe just like right there. But it's tough because you don't want to lose out on paddling. So just thinking about that, I don't want a jutted out position because I would have to paddle around it and it would drive you insane. So I think even if you just had the traditional profile, but the cool thing about the designs going forward is that you potentially don't have to have inflated tubes. Like let's say you made the boat out of carbon or rotomolded or just whatever design you wanted to, just to get the best design, for the function. So you'd still have the traditional shape, so you could paddle along this flat surface. But the underfoot profile, this tube would be actually fairly sticking out, and then the other tubes would be already tapered in, maybe more. So then when you actually go to lean onto that double diamond shape, then the boat tips. And that's where you can actually, especially this tube, you could have, So I guess two things that I was thinking, but this is asking a lot, especially if you're not going to disrupt paddling, is that if you lay that tube down, maybe it's because it's like a secondary stability or like a sponson, you can lay that closer to the water and maybe climb into your boat over a smaller deck height without your boat going vertical or just pulling over on itself. So that's a lot to ask for. The other thing that, I mean, this is a piece of dynamics. I was following, some footage of the RMR Thundercloud, and it's got 20-inch tubes, maybe even bigger 20-inch tubes, but it functions like the RMR Fat Cat, which I've used. So if you are stuck in a hole, like what happens is that one of the tubes acts just like its own raft, and it'll stick in the most prominent part of the hole. The other tube can be up higher out of the hole. When you have a round boat, especially like mine is highly rockered, like no chance. You're just going to fit into that hole like right there. That's where you're going to be high siding, is at the lowest point. Where if you have a paddle cat, that's, you can put one tube in, and that's actually at the lowest point, and maybe the tube you're on is actually higher. So it is one of the huge benefits of having, and that's paddle cat-like tubes. That's not a protruded floor. So those are things that are opposite of my boat, but they have benefits. And so it's just kind of fascinating. It's like where some of these design things can kind of go down two different paths. But I do think if you had the Thundercloud, yeah, keep those 20-inch tubes nice and tall, but then right at the middle of the boat, that could be an opportunity to keep the profile, the underfoot, the same roundedness, but then literally just cut out a big well so you could actually pull yourself up over onto a low deck height. But that would be making the boat out of like a rotomolded plastic if you had, but I was just thinking, so that's kind of a high hopes type of thing. But for R1ing, yeah, that's brutal to climb over, is very tall tubes. I mean, just R1, that's the huge limitation, is that once we do fall out, it's brutal to climb back in. Alright, hell yeah. Alright, so we did it with this video, so thanks for joining me. I think I'm done. Hell yeah.